Hey everybody, we're back to um, Christianity, and we wanted to jump right into the message of Jesus, and that isn't found in any better place than the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain, depending on what gospel you're in. Um, in the Sermon on the Mount, you are dealing, first of all, with the Beatitudes. It starts with the Beatitudes in both Matthew and Luke, but they're even different there. Matthew talks, they're called the spiritual Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, so they shall inherit the earth. And so, really, what you have is a maturity of spirituality from the Old Testament. And you have, remember, Matthew focusing in on Jesus as the new Moses. If you look at the Old Testament, you look at the Ten Commandments, it's a whole lot of like, thou shalt not, don't do that, get away from there, don't touch her. It's a lot of don'ts. Like, remember when you were like 3 and you reach for the stove and you got your hand hit? Like that mentality, it didn't mean that your parents couldn't explain it to you. It just meant you weren't ready for it, right? And so now, you as a young adult, like your parent is not going to slap your hand anymore, right? They're going to explain things to you because it's not, they have grown, they're not different. It's the same parent. It's just you weren't able to handle that at age 3. And that's what we have here is you have the development from the Old Testament where you have the 10 commandments, don't do this, don't do that. To here now you have Matthew with a retelling of how to live a good life. Instead of it's don't do this, don't do that, you don't get in trouble. Here is here's what you should do. Here's some suggestions. Be generous. Be care about stuff. Be gentle. Hunger and thirst for what's right. Be merciful to people, right? Be a peacemaker. These are all profoundly important to what it means to be a Christian, right? And we also have here at the end of Matthew's Beatitudes, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Now, for the people sitting around in 30 AD listening to Jesus actually say things like this, um, that would have been weird. They're like, what are you talking about? I just came from my house. I heard you were kind of an interesting speaker and I wanted to come and hear what you had to say. He wouldn't say that to them. But fast forward to 75 AD and the persecutions that the early Christian church were going through. Then this scripture would definitely apply. So this might be one of those scriptures that we could point to and say, aha, this is a scripture that the gospel writer put into the mouth of Jesus. Not that Jesus might have said this, but it was included in this because the people that the gospel writer was writing to in 75 AD needed to hear that, right? So that's a really good example of that happens from time to time in these gospels, is that you have words put into the mouth of Jesus so that the people of, of the early Christian church could get a message that they needed to hear. Now, moving over to Luke's Beatitudes, his are the physical Beatitudes, they're not the spiritual ones. Here you have, where Matthew had, blessed are the poor in spirit, which means, that you are dependent on God. Like you look like a child, you're dependent, right? Luke is, blessed are you poor, right? It's literally just, I don't have a penny in my pocket, literally. Blessed are you that hunger now, right? That's Luke. Where Matthew was, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. That's kind of a symbolic hunger. Where Luke is like, hey, you haven't eaten in 3 days, literally, right? So that's the difference between Matthew and Luke when we're talking about the different types of beatitudes. And it was speaking to different kinds of people. Remember, Luke was speaking to the poor and the outcast, and you can see that there, um, where you have in the Gospel of Luke, these Beatitudes that are speaking to the basic human needs of the people, right? Okay, so moving on. Um, let's see. Moving on to 9 here. Some more thoughts, more of the Sermon on the Mount or the plain here is that just a few things. Jesus's mentality. is to take the Old Testament and not get rid of it, but to go ahead and transform it, to take it and make it more spiritual, a little more challenging. The major difference, and this is a really important thing that I even will, oftentimes put on the final exam, is the difference between Christian spirituality and Jewish spirituality is that Jewish spirituality is about action. Did I do the action or not? You know, adultery. We're going to see that in the bottom here of this slide, where within Jewish law, if you went ahead and committed adultery, then you were on the hook. But if you did not actually do the act, then you are not on the hook. But if you look here at this down here, at the bottom of this slide, Jesus says, "You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery." Here he's just quoting the Old Testament. "But I say to you," and here's where he changes it, "that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart." This is very different. This is intention. Christianity is a morality of intention. What was your intention? Even if you didn't do it, you're on the hook for it because you lusted after. So if I'm walking through the mall and I see a beautiful woman, right? Of course, my initial instinct is, wow, that she's beautiful. She is hot, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean, that's not anything. Now, if I go ahead and for the next half hour think about, all kinds of fun I can have with her, as a married man, that would be, as a Christian, my intention is to I took that instinct and I took it and ran with it. In my intentions, that that could be something that I'm on the hook for. For a Jewish person, as long as I didn't do anything, then I'm in the clear. And that's a major challenge that Jesus puts out in his gospel. Is what makes Christianity unique is that morality is internal, right? There's the things I do, and then there's the sins that are internal. I mean, things like jealousy, right? Most of the time, jealousy does most of its damage. The sin of jealousy doesn't do any damage to anybody else. Usually, it just does a massive damage to ourselves internally, and that's what Jesus was trying to take the morality of intention, the morality of action from Judaism, and move it into something about intention, and that's important. So moving through here you had the same thing happen with murder, right? The Old Testament is like, kill him or not, and Christianity is like, have you hated this person so much, that you hated them in your heart, right? That could count as um, as murder. Um, Other things like, let's see, we move to the next slide. Um, I like this. He starts talking about the idea of, like, don't make vows. Be honest with what you are dealing with. Um, he says, don't swear by the temple or anything. Just have your yes mean yes and your no mean no. And that's the important part about morality is we're not going to go ahead and um, you don't need to like convince them, swear to God, man, swear to God. No, have you be a person who, when you say something, people believe it because the type of person you are. That's what Jesus is challenging here for. The next thing is he says to go that extra mile. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You've heard it said, but he says don't resist anybody. Whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn and give him also the other one. And so this is about to give generously even to people who do not deserve it. And that's a very powerful um, sign of strength in Christian understanding. We'll continue here in the next slide.